Today, we're privileged to be joined by a guest who brings a perspective that may not align entirely with the points we've explored in past episodes. And that's precisely why we're excited to have them on the show. At Outside Counsel, we believe that no issue can be fully understood without considering all of its dimensions from people with different perspectives. Because that's how we find nuance, understanding, and hopefully common ground. So let's dive in.
The scope of chronic pain is enormous. The number of Americans impacted by pain and the human suffering involved and the cost of the healthcare system and society is staggering. Pain is the number one reason why Americans access the healthcare system. It is the leading cause of disability in the United States. We've underinvested in pain research relative to its burden. We still do not understand the basic neurobiological mechanism of pain in the human body.
Welcome back to Outside Counsel. I'm your host, Jeffrey B. Simon. In the second part of my discussion with pain management advocate Claudia Merandi, founder of the Don't Punish Pain movement and the Doctor-Patient Forum. This episode explores inconvenient truths and uncomfortable questions about America's healthcare system and what has been termed as America's opioid crisis. How do we balance these competing concerns, which is that it is inhumane to prescribe controlled substances like opioids to desperate patients in ways that cause them to become addicted, and it is inhumane to inadequately treat severe constant pain? How do we balance these competing ideals?
We need to give these doctors some type of immunity. That's step one. We need a hotline for millions of abandoned pain patients. There was nowhere for us to go. When the DEA shuts down a doctor, they're supposed to provide patients with continuity of care. The CDC received funding for a program called the Opioid Rapid Response Program. And my colleague reached out to the head of the program and said, we need doctors. And she didn't like that we were calling her. And the way the CDC responded is they just banned us from attending any webinars discussing patient abandonment, which was bananas because we're the only nonprofit that does it. So how do we balance it? We start by getting a hotline for abandoned pain patients. We get these doctors. Then we also need to establish a bank of doctors who are willing to continue the patient's medication, get a psychologist involved. We don't send them off to opioid-free pain clinics that doctors are requiring people to get epidural steroid injections, or they're not getting their medications. That's got to stop. So there's still a lot of bad actors. The interventional pain doctors coercing people into getting procedures that aren't approved by the FDA so they can get their medication. No, none of that's working. We need to start by getting doctors some type of immunity, get a hotline for the abandoned pain patients, get these 2022 guidelines implemented across the board, de-implement the 2016 CDC guidelines, encourage doctors to start treating pain again. And that's what I tried to get done in Rhode Island when I meet with the health department. You've got to put the same vim and vigor into getting doctors to start treating pain that you did encouraging them to not treat pain. So that's what needs to start.
In my work and the work I do with my co-counsel, of course, we have put certain opioid drug companies on trial for their marketing behavior, but we have never sought to put pain patients on trial. Quite the opposite. I feel like the media sometimes does. How can I, as a host of a podcast, better portray pain patients with the dignity they deserve? Who should we talk to on Outside Counsel? And can you help us find them?
Yeah, I think what you need to do is you need to consider having just a series about changing course, start treating pain again. And you can't be afraid to use the word opioid. We cannot be afraid of that word. We are at the lowest level of opioid prescribing that we were before OxyContin came on the market. And there's no difference in addiction The same number, like the addiction, the same number existed then as it does today. So I think if you just maybe do a series, invite doctors. How do we get doctors to listen, to start treating pain again? First, we have to find the doctors who haven't been paid to speak out against full agonist opioids while promoting Suboxone. We've created the opioid elimination industry, and everybody's making money at my expense.
That's an interesting point. Now, I certainly agree that opioid addiction rates remain high, and I would argue it's because illicit opioids have filled a void that reduction in prescribing has caused. And I also agree with you that some pain patients have become collateral damage in failure to prescribe opioids when appropriate, especially in the area of acute pain. Having said that, what kind of alternative pain management methods should we be having a broader conversation about?
Oh, massage therapy. Massage therapy should be free. I'm fortunate. I pay a lot of money for my health insurance up front, so I don't have copays for physical therapy. If you're going to take away their opioids, you should have put something in place like massage therapy. A lot of these people are bed-bound, home-bound, wheelchair-bound. Provide them transportation so they can get to their massage therapy or physical therapy. Jeffrey, I wish I could say the alternatives to opioids have been life-saving for my constituents, but they've all failed miserably. People will ask me, why hasn't the FDA approved a non-addictive opioid? One doesn't exist. One will never exist. I think if you're predisposed to addiction, you're going to always battle the demons of becoming an addict. The interventions have been a colossal failure. I will say, like, more and more interventional doctors have reached out to me because they want me to back off. They don't want me to continue to go on social media platforms, but I'm not stopping. I'm truthful, and I want doctors to be truthful to patients. Don't tell your patient that opioids causes pain. That's a form of mental illness. Don't do that. I just ask, let's have a little respect for these people. We have been beaten down. I advocated for a judge whose son was forced to choose between a benzodiazepine and an opioid. Her son had ALS. That's how bad this is, right? And when a Superior Court judge contacts me out of the blue, I advocated for a meteorologist. He was taking 3 pain pills a day. He said, I can't go on the air anymore. The doctor cut me off of my medication. Stop cutting these people off.
What's particularly enraging about that is even people that you would consider to be staunch opponents in the medical community of long-term prescribing of opioids agree that it's appropriate for palliative care and with chronic pain, and ALS is certainly an example. That's outrageous.
It should be an example, but it isn't. Sickle cell, people with cancer. I advocate for women who are having their breast removed, being told you shouldn't have any pain. Here's a Tylenol, limb amputations. The list goes on. But the cruelest form, what's happening now, are the babies. 2 weeks ago, I advocated for a 3-year-old. Nebraska Transplant Center had a few organs removed, and the nurse said, I don't feel comfortable giving her the Dilaudid. And it became such a horrible thing for this baby to go through. And they said, we don't want her to be a drug addict when she's 16. So you can see how that opioid misinformation has crept its way into the acute setting. Animals, pets. I advocated for a canine handler. He said, my German Shepherd was hit, and the veterinarian said, I'm not allowed to prescribe opioids anymore. I can only give the dog gabapentin. And the dog became completely delirious. So we have to stop this. This is cruelty. What I want your listeners to remember, never forget my words. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter how much money you have. When you get sick, you're sick. Because I had it all, Jeffrey. And I lost everything because of Crohn's disease. Illness doesn't discriminate.
That's well said. That when one is in intractable pain, no matter what the cause, it makes their world so small, right? And it cuts them off from everything. And they deserve to have adequate pain relief, the most safe and effective that there is, whatever that is for them. But to what extent, if any, do you think the healthcare insurance industry in the United States bears some responsibility where, sure, they'll reimburse healthcare providers for some kinds of treatment, but not others, which might be safer and more effective for them long term? Is that something you've experienced or not?
To be quite honest, I never wanted to go down the insurance rabbit hole, but I seem to have found myself stuck in it. The insurance companies have done their fair share of damage, right? Offering incentives to doctors who don't prescribe opioids ought to be illegal. It's happening. We know that hospitals were offering emergency room doctors incentives to not write scripts for opioids for acute pain. That needs to stop. Blue Cross and all of these other insurance companies, they send letters out to people saying, we're not going to be covering the cost of your 90 MME anymore. We're only going to cover 3 pain pills, and here's why. And they cite a study, but they misquote the study. I don't understand what's going on. And also, according to the Krebs study, the placebo worked just as well as opioids. No, that's not what the study said at all. So when you have a whole bunch of stupid people repeating a lie over and over again, it becomes the truth. And insurance companies are notorious. But my doctors got arrested for not accepting insurance. My plastic surgeons don't accept insurance. That's a cash only business. Just when we think we have a little relief, then more doctors get hit. So a good place is to rein in the insurance companies. They're not covering the cost of opioids, or they're requiring a prior authorization. So after you've had your knee replaced, now you're waiting for opioids for the prior authorization. And then even if you can get the prior authorization, you only have a 50% chance of having the pharmacist fill it. And if the pharmacist does fill it, you have a 50% chance of having them have the medication in stock. And that's because of the opioid settlement, right? Part of the settlement said the 3 largest distributors, opioid distributors or opioid manufacturers, have to basically police the pharmacies. And now you get that problem. So now the opioid makers, they don't want to give the medication to the distributor. Distributor doesn't want to give it to the pharmacy. When does it end? What do they want to do? Eliminate the opioid completely? Then what?
I've never heard anybody say they want to eliminate the opioid completely, but obviously there may be some with that in mind. In general, I believe the strategy of people who are on a certain side of this public health matter are that opioids are appropriate in limited circumstances and have been for more than 100 years, that we didn't have an opioid epidemic prior to a change in marketing strategies beginning in the 1990s. And yet we always had opioids, and that promoting false themes to promote greater prescribing created a health crisis that we now need to get back to where we were. That's the thesis. How do you react to that thesis?
I think nothing will change unless we implement the updated guidelines and we invest the same $50 million that the CDC paid a company to implement. They need to find another $50 million to de-implement it, then probably another $50 million to implement it. And the way we give money away in the United States, I'm sure there's a few $100 million to help 30 million, they said 50 million live with chronic pain. Our data supports that there's an estimated 8 to 10 million who are still on long-term opioid therapy, but I'm sure the number is greater. What we've done, Jeffrey, is we've taken the elderly person who is stable on pain medication, we've destabilized them, and now they can no longer contribute to society. We've taken the electrician, plumber, police officer, firefighter who was contributing to society on 2 pain pills a day. We've destabilized them, and a lot of those people have had to apply for disability. But nobody really knows because patient outcome has never been measured. That's really crazy when you think about it, though, right? Imagine doing a cancer study and saying, okay, we're going to give this group this medication, this group that medication, but we're not going to follow up with anybody. It would never happen.
As both a pain patient who's been through some of the things you're describing, as well as one who advocates for them every day, are you optimistic or pessimistic about the future of pain management in the United States?
I don't want to discourage people, but it's looking pretty bad.
Why?
We're in a dire situation. I can't encourage doctors to prescribe opioids. I'm actually afraid for my doctors who are still treating pain. And I've said this to my colleague, I can't in good faith encourage doctors until these doctors deserve some type of immunity. So the situation seems very grim right now. And I don't like to discourage people because we really are their lifeline. But the government basically picked on the disabled person, knowing full well that we didn't have money to advocate for ourselves. They knew what they were doing, and we still don't have a voice. And I've done everything I can think of. And 4 years ago, it was, we have to wait to see who's going to win the election. Here we are. We're in the same situation, but lobbyists cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. And all of these lawmakers, both state and federal, that I've met with, the reps, they always ask me, are you working with a lobbyist?
What's interesting, I was just thinking a bit about this. You've got a circumstance where either the former president of the United States, Donald Trump, or the current vice president of the United States, Kamala Harris, will become the 47th president of the United States. And by the time this goes to air, that will have happened. Both of them agree that there is a widespread opioid epidemic in America that requires redress. And I'm thinking of you and the perspective you have, which is, wait, I'm not so sure. I understand that opioids are addictive, and I concede that they were liberally prescribed, but I have a whole other perspective. How do you want our listeners to understand the distinction you're making?
What's going to change here is the Supreme Court all ruled unanimously in a case, Dr. Ruan. And they basically all came to the conclusion, okay, you're not going to prosecute these doctors unless you can prove that they were prescribing with malintent, right? The Supreme Court also ruled the CDC has been hiring people that never disclosed their conflicts, Chevron deference. So that can also work in our favor. And I think RFK is willing to really challenge the CDC. The DOJ needs to be dismantled. I don't know what's going on, but the DOJ is very scary to me as an advocate. I think people have grown tired of the same old narrative, opioid epidemic. I've got about 400,000 people who follow me on one platform. They told 400,000 people about me. They told 400,000 about me. Nobody cares anymore. Stop saying opioid epidemic because you try to put an image, and now people are like, that was then, this is now. I'm suffering. I don't care about the opioid epidemic. And that's how we want people to understand this. That was then. This is now. So let's focus on now. How can we get these people adequate pain relief? These patients are forced to jump through unimaginable hoops, random pill counts, drug testing. The list goes on and on. We're having these people go into the office every month because they're all treated so inhumanely that compliance has already been implemented. And the app, so you've got to download this app and then fill out this questionnaire. What more do you want from us? We have given you everything that you needed, but let's stop saying the opioid epidemic. Let's start calling it a fentanyl poisoning crisis. Because I want to say one other thing. I had a mom contact me. She said her son had his wisdom teeth removed, orthopedic surgeon. She called the doctor and said, Oh my gosh, my son is in so much pain. He's, oh, absolutely not. We don't prescribe opioids at all. And he developed dry socket and his pain was excruciating, was running a fever. That boy went on Snapchat and he bought what he thought was a Percocet, and mom found him dead. That boy was poisoned by fentanyl. Had a doctor treated that boy, that mom would still have her son today. That's what's happening now. So let's start calling a fentanyl poisoning crisis instead of an opioid epidemic. If I was to run for office, not saying I am, but if I am, I would abolish the prescription drug monitor program. It is a surveillance tool. It is bad. Nothing good has come from it. It was created simply to reduce the number of opioid prescriptions, but it's not going to stop there. Now you're hearing other states, we want to put all medications on the prescription drug monitor program. That's bad.
The prescription drug monitoring program is a database in states all across America where a doctor or their staff can determine whether or not a patient has received controlled substances prescriptions like opioids or benzodiazepines in recent months, and if so, by whom. In general, do you view that as not a useful program?
Has it helped? There's 100,000 dead Americans. When we had a supposed opioid epidemic, it was 16,000 people who died from opioids, right? But I like to approach this from a realistic point of view. Has it helped? No. There's 100,000 dead Americans. Maybe those people were better off when they had access to those opioids that they were doctor shopping for. Some doctors really like the PDMP, but it's become a weapon. That's the problem. You've got law enforcement who can stalk that PDMP when they shouldn't be on it. I've looked at the PDMP and I'm not even a doctor. I was at a friend's office who's a doctor. I said, oh, let me see the PDMP. Okay, I'm on the PDMP now. This is what needs to change with the PDMP. If anybody looks at my PDMP, I want to be notified. That should be a law. I don't think the PDMP has helped. I think it actually increased deadly overdoses by 900%. I thought we were supposed to be saving lives. Last week, I organized a protest outside Brandeis University. That's pretty much the hub of the prescription drug monitor program. And let's face it, everybody's made so much money, and the settlement funds are being put right back into that PDNP. It's all about surveillance, and surveillance is supposed to be prevention. I think it's been a colossal failure. And I'll tell you, if I was to run for office in Rhode Island, I would say I want that PDMP turned off in Rhode Island for 2 years as a pilot program. And I want to see overdoses from when we turned it off to present. Maybe it'll help. Maybe it won't help. But come on, we got to start thinking outside the box.
What have we not discussed today, if anything, that we should? Because either I or the audience needs to hear it from you.
Yeah, I think we've touched on pretty much everything. I want to say my pain patient stories used to keep me awake at night until the doctors found me, and the doctor's stories haunt me. Think about it. You work your whole life to be a doctor, and then in one fell swoop, everything's taken away from you. I want people to understand what the Department of Justice is capable of doing to doctors. And if you're a doctor who happens to hear this, you've got to be compliant. And sometimes I think after the feds invest money in investigating you, they're not stopping. They need a win and they need to justify those resources. So if you're a doctor who happens to hear this, document, do everything you can. And you can do everything you can, and you still may go to prison, because all the feds need is one expert. I would like to touch on that if I could. The experts that are testifying against these doctors, these are serial experts. They're using old, outdated data. They've created their own junk science. And let's face it, a lot of these jurors, Jeffrey, these are lay people. And when they listen to a doctor, they'll say, oh, doctor said it, off to prison you go. And if you're a listener who has a history of trauma and you go to a doctor and they give you an opioid questionnaire, you can't even be honest, because if you have a history of pre-adolescent sexual abuse or depression, any type of mental illness, it's going to be used as a weapon. So that's something else that maybe in the future we can talk about.
For listeners who might be struggling with chronic pain or know someone who is, what advice or resources can you recommend here?
So we have our website, thedoctorpatientforum.com, and we've also created a Facebook group for each state. So if you live in Texas, you would search Texas DPF. Join your Facebook group for support. You may be able to find a doctor, but there really aren't any doctors who are willing to treat pain, but it's still a place for support. And if you do have a doctor and they're trying to wean you, take you off of your opioids, we also have a Patreon subscription page. We offer coaching calls. Bev and I do not accept any money from any industry. We rely solely on donations. And we couldn't, in good faith, ask these people for money because they're disabled. They can barely survive on $900 a month. But Patreon is affordable, $5 a month or $30 a month. Subscribe. Donate if you can. Get involved. When I go on TikTok and I say, I'm flying out to North Carolina Saturday, December 7th, show up. Call your lawmakers because we are really doing everything we can to get these people help.
For our listeners who would like to get involved in pain patient advocacy or to support the work of Doctor Patient Forum and Don't Punish Pain efforts, how can they do so?
They can donate at our website. We are a 501c3, so donations are welcome. And like I said, I need boots on the ground. I need lobbyists. We need a presence at the State House. We need lawmakers who are willing to challenge it. My friend, his name was Greg Amore. He's the Secretary of State in Rhode Island. He was the first lawmaker in the country that would say, these people need help. These are pain patients. So he sponsored the bill. So go to our website, look at the bills that we have, approach your lawmaker, take a version of that and say, would you please consider sponsoring a bill? Stop saying opioid epidemic and start saying fentanyl crisis.
Healthcare providers and lawmakers and neighbors can disagree about the dimensions of the public health crisis, whether it's opioid epidemic, fentanyl epidemic, too many people suffering with untreated pain. And civil discourse about these things, just like you're providing today, is essential to creating understanding. And nobody can honestly disagree that what you're doing, which is devoting your life to serving others, is an absolute good, whether people agree or disagree with you on any particular issue. So I can't thank you enough on behalf of all of us at Outside Counsel for appearing on the show, for your selfless efforts to provide your information and what you do to help others, and for your insights today.
Thank you, Jeffrey. And we'd like to have you on the Doctor Patient Forum podcast when you have some time.
Sold. Thank you to my guest, Claudia Merandi, and thank you to our audience for tuning in. For more information on Claudia's organization, please visit www.thedoctorpatientforum.com.
This podcast is produced by Shannon Saletti of Revel and Convey and Larry
Shavana. The opinions expressed on Outside Counsel are neither legal nor medical advice. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the speakers, guests, experts, and/or host. They do not expressly nor necessarily reflect the opinion of any institution with which I am or ever have been a member and should never be attributed as such. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Outside Counsel. I'm Jeffrey B. Simon.